On the other hand, I have religious people who say, well, have you not read the Bible? The Bible says clearly that you can't talk to the dead. You should not talk to the dead. And then I just try to walk the logic back, which is for the scientists, it's, well, data's data. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. If 7% are seeing Jesus, why don't we find out what Jesus is saying when they see him? That's the question.
Today's guest again is Richard Martini, an award-winning American film director, producer, screenwriter, and freelance journalist extraordinaire. Rich has made quite a name for himself in researching the afterlife, or what he refers to as the flip side. Like I continue to say, because he's been on a number of times, just go ahead and Google him to gain access to any of his many books and documentaries about the flip side, or tune in as I do to an episode of his podcast, Hacking the Afterlife with Jennifer Schaefer. Today, we're going to continue to talk about his latest book, The Greatest Story Never Told, as told by Jesus and those who knew him. In this episode, we will be exploring what Richard learned from those who claim to have, in past lives, witnessed the actual crucifixion, and how what they collectively share departs from the story we have all been told. Welcome back.
Kristin, what a delight to hear your voice. You have such a melodic tone. It really, I'm sure everybody tells you that, but it's just great. And as we discussed before, you know, I'm not really doing any publicity for the book, mainly because as a former altar boy, you know, I can just see all the nuns lining me up for hitting me with a ruler once I get to the flip side. But at the same time, I think part of me just wants people to find it on their own, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but I'm going to do a little bit better job. So I really appreciate this because it allows me to sort of focus on the kind of questions that people might have about the topic. So
well,
thank
it's
you for
such
that.
well, you're so welcome, and thank you. The honor is truly all mine. For me, it's just such a seminal work and a very, very courageous one. So before we got started, I was asking you, and we were thinking, let's just wait until we're actually recording. To me, it takes a lot of courage to say, hey, I know through time immemorial, this is what we've been told through the Bible, right? Christianity, Catholicism. And here you are coming out with an alternate story, right? Or it's only alternate if it's never been told, right?
Well,
So
it's not alternate if it's true. That's
if it's
the
true,
quote.
that's how it was. Yes.
That was the quote that
I
Jesus
butchered that
himself
quote.
said.
Yeah, it's not alternate if it's true. But what I'm really curious to know is, even though you haven't been putting a ton into marketing, what has the reception been like, both good and bad or indifferent? Tell me what's going on with that.
Well, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about my process, which was when, the first book I did was called Flipside, and that was the documentary I was making, and then I made a book out of it. And it was really after the book was finished and it was just about to come out when I ran into somebody, a close friend, who was suffering because her mom had passed away. And so I recommended she do hypnotherapy with somebody from the Newton Institute, a guy named Scott DeTamble. Very good. Lightbetweenlives.com is his website. Scotty's here in Claremont, and he agreed to come over to her house. And so, as I think I mentioned before, the night before, we happened to be talking about this research where people were showing up in Life Between Life sessions where they saw Jesus. Now, subsequently, I found recently this study that was done in 2001 by a doctor at the Department of Perceptual Studies at University of Virginia, DOPS, their medical lab, and it's about the data about what happens in near-death experiences. It turns out 70% of the people who have an experience. 30% don't. 1 to 3% have a negative experience. You would think it would be higher, yin yang, but it's not. 1 to 3% of all of those have something hellish happen. 11% see a deity or some kind of wise being or an avatar. And 7% say that's Jesus, or they see Jesus. Of course, my comment is always, is he wearing a name tag? Like, how do you know that's him? But that's what they report. Okay, so he's in that data. he started showing up in my data. Let's call it that. I'm filming people under hypnosis. So here I am. I think how many years ago? About 12 years ago, I'm with this friend of mine, and I'm filming her, and she's recalling a lifetime in Jerusalem where she knew him, saw him speak, and she began to weep uncontrollably. And she said, "There's just so much love coming from him." And so ultimately, when I first heard that, I'm thinking, I can't help but be a skeptic on this area, which is, why is she coming up with this? And she had no background in religion, really. She collected crosses. It's funny. Antique crosses were all over her apartment. I know Scott pointed it out to me. But, she really wasn't a religious person per se. And then that just started happening over and over and over again. So people who are atheists or skeptics, I'm having doing a guided meditation with them, having a conversation in my coffee shop, and they're telling me about a dream that they had where they saw their father, and then their father is like pointing over at somebody, and I go, "Well, who's he pointing to?" And they say, "It's Jesus." And I go, "Jesus, really?" And then they go, I don't know how. I don't believe in him." That's one guy said that. Different religion. So at first I thought, well, I'm going down a weird street here, because if I'm reporting what people say about the afterlife based on what they're reporting. And if I choose to ignore this part about Jesus or any religion, then I'm not really telling the story. So I left. There was a chapter in Flipside, and then it wasn't until 3 books later that I felt compelled to just, what is this Jesus stuff? And so I put it out into like a third of a book, Hacking the Afterlife. And then, as I've mentioned on your podcast, thanks to you, I've been able to mention this, the former head of Paramount Studios, David Kirkpatrick, reached out to me, said, "Look, I know you've been collecting these stories. You should write a book about just what people are saying he's saying, in chronological order, starting from his birth and then up till, as I assumed at that time, when he was on the cross. Everybody, you'd think, well, that's when it ends. Right. That's not what he tells us. And so then I have a forum on Quora called Hacking the Afterlife. We have like 50,000 subscribers, and then we've had like 44 million views. I don't know what that really means. It's an algorithm. Does somebody click on it, click off? I don't know.
It means people are paying attention.
So I do get a raft of emails every day. Not emails, but comments. And it's interesting because they sort of break down. The scientists are furious, saying, well, consciousness is confined to the brain and near-death experiences don't exist. Right. On the other hand, I have religious people who say, well, have you not read the Bible? And the Bible says clearly that you can't talk to the dead, and you should not talk to the dead. And then I just try to walk the logic back, which is, for the scientists, it's, well, data's data. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. If 7% are saying Jesus, why don't we find out what Jesus is saying when they see him? That's the question. And then in terms of the religious thing, again, what is Jesus saying? So, and you could argue like, well, these people are all making this up. Or some people argue, well, it's Satan making this up. Then again, if you're going to walk these comments back, you think about what the Bible is, and Jesus has said it in the quotes that Bible is metaphor. He says that not as a pejorative or a negative thing, but he's saying it's like a poem. You have to interpret it for how it helps you. When we look at weird details about the Bible, and forgive me, those who are adhering to that document, the incongruities everywhere. Satan's a member of God's council. The book of Job. And you wonder, like, was God not taking attendance that day? Like, how did he get on the council? And then further, like, how could he not know what he was about to do, which was, trick Job into a, bad experience. Anyway, so we start to see, it's easier to see it as a metaphor. You're trying to explain certain things. And there's so many incongruities. I won't go into them all. But ultimately, when somebody gets upset about it, I try to point out, well, we can ask Jesus. And if you have a problem with what Jesus is saying to these other people, ask him to clarify. We have this illusion that we cannot ask them. It's interesting, you mentioned the podcast I do with Jennifer Schaefer, Hacking the Afterlife. A couple of weeks ago, we had an avatar stop by, Yogananda. Yogananda was not a deity, but he's considered way high up in the pantheon of Hindu pandits and people who are philosophers. And I've read his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. It's a great, terrific book. It tells his story as a young man experiencing these kind of unusual things where the veil was not quite with him, and he was always seeing people who weren't there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he came through, and Jennifer was saying, "Oh, I have a number of clients that really adhere to his philosophy." And Gary Wright was one, the guy who wrote Dreamweaver, that song, and he wrote it based on that book on Autobiography of a Yogi. I didn't know that either.
And may I slow you down just for those who are not familiar with Hacking the Afterlife with Jennifer Schaefer? Jennifer Schaefer is a medium who works often to help solve crimes.
That's right. She works with law enforcement nationwide, a whole bunch of different people, and I've interviewed those people to see, like, how did she help you? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Put it this way, everyone's a medium. That's my point of view of this. Everyone's a medium. We all have filters. Most of us don't see or hear people. We might dream about them sometimes. We might have one experience, but in Jennifer's case, she can not only see them, and she sees like an outline of them, but she can hear them. And sometimes they can put sensations in front of her, a smell and a taste and a feeling, etc. It's her filters are down. It's not like a gift. And I mean, of course, people call it that.
Yes.
I just try to avoid that nomenclature. It's just her filters are different. Mm-hmm. You can bypass the filters by doing. Yeah, if you learn to, you can do it through guided meditation. You can do it through hypnotherapy, hypnosis can bypass the filters. You might bypass the filters with an accident, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, and a dream. Hallucinogens are a common way for people to bypass the filters. But you can have side effects with those. Meditation, you don't really have any side effects. So anyway, that's kind of what I've been sort of grappling with and going over back and forth. So to answer your question, as somebody who grew up Catholic, I can tell you I'm sure that there's members of my family who won't even be in the same room with me, just because they've read some of these things, and it offends their ancestors' ancestors. I come from a long line of Catholics. Let me just say, as well as remembering previous lifetimes as Catholics.
Yeah.
But I got to say, when somebody came to us in Santa Monica and said, "Well, if you guys wanted to get into this really cool preschool where a lot of people go, if you're Presbyterians, you're in." So that's how fast it was for me to go from Catholic to Presbyterian. Anyway, okay. I think once you're baptized, you're stuck. But that being said, I understand how I'm stepping on toes and offending people, but if you don't speak the truth, and then you have to think about the Jesus perspective. So every time he shows up, he says the same things. He says, all religions point to the same garden.
Yeah.
He says, you don't have to follow me. What a weird thing to say. You don't have to follow me, but allow me to walk beside you, because we're all walking each other home. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so... I couldn't craft that if I was trying to think up... when somebody says it's a demon or somebody's talking to you think, okay, now demons are walking around saying unconditional love is the only important thing. I mean, it just doesn't make a lick of sense.
No, it makes absolutely no sense. It's nothing malevolent.
No.
It is all just lessons of love.
It's just not in the research at all. And I've tried to ask questions that are problematic, let's say, to see if I could make him get off.
Debunk it or
just to see what.
Track.
Okay. So I'll give you one example, and I'm sure I may have mentioned it early. Forgive me for repeating it, but it is kind of funny. So Jennifer was the third medium that I had met who, and in the course of our conversation, I'm filming her, This is our first conversation, and it's a 3-hour thing that we did together. And at some point, she says, I'm seeing Jesus. And I said, where is he? And she said, I see him on the other side of the room. I said, well, can you invite him closer? And as she did, her face turned beet red, and she couldn't breathe, and she started to sob, weep. Mm-hmm. And I said, and I had seen that in 2 other people who were seeing him. And so I said, can I ask him a question? I had never asked it before. I'd never done that. And she said, he says yes. And I said, okay, what's the matter with you? What are you doing? You get close to people and they get sick. Why are you doing that? Now, I asked it that way, as a problematic, to see if that person was going to now defend him or defend. Yeah. And his answer was, I brought more of Source with me to my lifetime. He didn't say Father. He didn't say, anything that was related to religion. He said, I brought more of Source with me to this lifetime. And when people get near me, they experience unconditional love. And that's why they have that reaction. I mean, it's a brilliant answer if you just look at it from that. But yours truly, who is always trying to find a way in, I said, well, not so much with the Romans.
Right.
And then his reaction to that was laughter. I didn't hear it, but Jennifer did, and she didn't know what I meant. Not so much with the Romans. And then she said, I don't know what that means, but he's laughing. Yeah. And when that happened, I thought, okay, this is a very unusual conversation, because I made a joke that only he got.
Right.
That if he was so unconditional love when you're around him, like, why did they drag him off and, beat him and torture him and stuff?
Torture and
and anyway, and so that allowed me to sort of see everything that I might ask him from a new perspective. Like, why don't I just ask him questions about his journey? So
yeah, that's a good segue. And what I'm hearing in that is, yes, it was with Jennifer, but that repeated pattern of this, what I hear, and when listening to the book, he has, I shouldn't say past tense, that was weird. He has a sense of humor. He is very gentle, very loving, and it's always recurringly, if that's a word, irrespective of who you are interviewing, it's the same message.
It's the same, sometimes word for word. And that's really mind-bending. So I'm talking to somebody for the first time I've ever met them, and they're saying, I'm seeing, now, it's not just a medium that's seeing Jesus. There are people that I'm having a conversation, they're scientists, they're neurosurgeons, or it doesn't matter, clergy.
That's wild.
And they're saying, I'm seeing someone who looks like Jesus. And when I hear that, I think, okay, well, let's find out. So can you bring him into the room? And then, yeah, he's here. And then describe him. And then they talk about him. And sometimes they say the same odd coloring of his eyes,
flecks of gold,
which gives me a clue that I'm on the right path. And then I'll ask a weird question, like, can you ask him to change into some other clothing? Thinking, because it's hard to talk to somebody in blue, robes. They look like a Greek philosopher.
A little intimidating.
Yeah, and you're going to talk. You're not going to say, "Hey, Greek philosopher, what's up?" But when I say that, this is really odd. I think it's odd. They almost every time, maybe 95% of the time, they say, "Oh, he changed into jeans and a t-shirt."
Yeah.
And I started going, does he only have, that's all he's got in his closet? Like, what else has he got? Anyway,
okay.
I know we talked about this last time because I thought it was you that had seen a Grateful Dead on his t-shirt. But anyway.
It wasn't me. It was someone else, but I loved that so much, that sense of humor. So I think this is a really great segue into talking about the crucifixion. Because we all, and I was not raised religiously at all, but we all know that story.
We do.
The story you heard repeatedly was quite a departure.
And, when I heard him tell me this alternate story, and then I heard other people tell me their version of the story. So we're talking about a crew of people that are helping him survive the crucifixion. The way it appears, from what his friends told me and what he's told me, is that about 2 years prior to the events, he saw what was going to happen. He's a medium in his own right. Prophet, they call it prophecy. That's the same thing. Come on.
Same thing.
He saw what was going to happen, and so did some of his friends who were also able to see. And their reaction was like, you have to get out of town. And his reaction was like, well, wait a minute. If this is happening, then it's happening. So how do I survive it? Is it possible to survive it? Or maybe he even saw himself surviving it and knew that he was going to survive it. You see? So ultimately, he makes up this thing with a very small group of people. The apostles were not involved, mainly because nobody controlled them. We didn't know who they were going to tell. They might tell somebody else. So it was a very closely kept secret of how they were going to try to prevent his death on the cross. And so that now we have all of these different accounts from different people saying, well, I was here and I was there and I saw this thing and I saw that thing. And all of these stories add up to the same thing of that he was going to be on that cross for as few hours as possible, as he could. Some people estimate 3, but it was, 1 day. Usually you're up there for 2 weeks. And apparently Joseph of Arimathea bribed Pilate. We know that in Aramaic he went to Pilate and asked for the living body of Jesus, and Pilate corrected him and said, "You mean the corpse?" But in the way it was translated, it just says body. So he goes and asks for the body of Jesus, and Pilate agrees to give him the body of Jesus. But he said corpse in Aramaic. So somewhere along the line, he was only up there for 3 hours. So how do you know when it's a corpse? Well, we think it's like you stab him and then you see blood and water flow out, and that means he's dead. Well, as we know, that means the opposite. Blood and water flowing means the heart's pumping, so they've got to be alive. And this whole thing of the gall being soaked with some kind of a drug that knocked him out, the vinegar water. Why give him vinegar water? Did anybody think about that? Like, why not just give him water? No, but they had this special gall that just happened to be there in a bucket of it, and they put that up to his face, and then he passes out. And they stab him in the side, and then they take him off. And they take him off to this cave where it's very unusual because there are people in the book who claim that they knew about this cave because it was a cave within a cave. That apparently you went into the cave, and then if you rolled underneath like a low ledge, you could get to another cave within that cave. And that nobody would know about it. You couldn't see it. And that's what people report. And I mean, then, of course, I'm hearing this story and I'm thinking, well, how can I check this against any records? Right. And of course, you have the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, and you have the descriptions of what happened. You can kind of set John aside because he was 100 years after the event. These other 2 guys, or 3 guys, they were pretty much right within that time frame, writing about what they saw happen. Nicodemus shows up with 90 pounds of aloe and myrrh, which are still restoratives. They were never, no Jewish person has ever anointed the dead, ever in the history of the planet. So, I mean, that's a pretty blatant falsehood in the text. Yeah. It just has never, ever happened. Ask any Jewish person. They don't anoint their dead. They never have, and let alone with aloe and myrrh. And then think about what 90 pounds of aloe and myrrh look like. And how do you use aloe and myrrh as a restorative? And so people in the book talk about how they use it, how they actually use that as a balm on his wounds in this other cave, and who was in there and why they were in there, and how it took so many months or weeks for him to recover. But meanwhile, they have this other part of the plot where Mary Magdalene is there saying, oh my God, he's gone, he's vanished, he's risen, or whatever they say. Mm-hmm. And Peter shows up, and Peter, of course, wasn't trusted enough to know this story because he runs into the cave and he's like, he's gone. But nobody said, hey, what about the 90 pounds of aloe and myrrh that were here yesterday?
90
pounds. Where'd that go? Yeah, where'd that go? How come that's not there? Did that vanish? I mean, it's CSI.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing was going through my head. Like crime scene investigators would be all over this. Yeah.
But then I'm seeing that in the text itself, and I forget which guy said it, but it was like the guards that were assigned to watch the cave who were apparently hired by the Sanhedrin, they came back and said, hey, you know what, their followers came and took him. And the quote-unquote Sanhedrin said, oh, you're lying. That's because you fell asleep. I mean, that's in the text. But these guys who were there actually said, no, they came and took him. And they went, no, you're lying. You must be lying because he's vanished. So now think about that event and how fraught with angst, anxiety that would be. Your friend who's just been on a cross has now been spirited away, and they're hiding him. One of the women who went in to take care of him said that, they had a small group and they took turns. So no one was gone from their family for too long. Nobody'd wonder, like, where were you for 6 hours?
Can't get suspicious.
So, that story of him surviving the crucifixion for me was mind-bending. But then when I saw that in the text itself, it pointed to these really obvious things. That when he shows up in Galilee, and then you say, CSI, how far is Galilee from Jerusalem? Anybody know? Hello? Anybody out there? It's 90 miles away. So it's not like he walked out on Sunday and went to Galilee. It would take days, weeks, and people saw him along the way to Galilee, and they were like, hey, don't I know you? And this idea of not recognizing him, come on. He was literally supposed to have been on this thing and beaten like couple of hours ago, but literally it's months later. So now so people aren't recognizing him because he's healed. And now he gets to Galilee where his buddies are there, and they're startled because none of them knew. They're startled to see him. And then they don't say he walked through a wall. It says the door was locked and then he was inside. So it was almost like they're trying to imply that he climbed through, a miracle. I mean, those are in the days when the story only worked if you had a miracle in there somewhere. So he goes in and he sees them, and his buddy Thomas is like, you died 3 months ago, let's say, or 6 months ago. What are you doing here? And he said, look, take a look. And Thomas, pokes him and is like, oh, well, okay, I see where the wound was.
And also, then, I think if I may slow you down.
Sure.
You mentioned last time we met, that he also had studied meditation and the capacity to move into alternate states, altered states, right? So that he could survive the pain and anguish in a way that any normal mortal would just
yes.
die.
All right, let's go back to that moment, those moments on the cross. And we have talked about this. Multiple people talked about his many trips on the Silk Road from Jerusalem to Hemis, which is a monastery in Kashmir. And I've been to it. And this is kind of where this all started, because I mentioned that I was there and an abbot turned to me and said, Jesus studied here. And I went, which Jesus?
You have some really interesting little points in your own story, which seem like they were kind of always like
orchestrated.
Yeah, opening your eyes.
I was watching Dr. Moody, Ray Moody, the other day, was doing a talk, and he was saying, he's convinced that somebody's written his life because, each chapter, these different things happen. They all sort of add up. And that happened to me too. I felt like it was too weird that I would meet somebody in chapter 2 who would come back in chapter 10 and be like this very, influential person. But literally, I was sitting in this monastery. Now, why did the abbot talk to me? There was a whole group of us there, and he sat next to me, and he whispered in my ear, this is where Jesus studied. And I went, which Jesus are you talking about? And he said, Isa. And I was like, what? And I didn't get it. And if I had gotten it, I know that this text, there's a copy of it at Hemis. There's copies of it in different places. I would have asked to have seen the text. Yeah. Listen, there's a whole body of argumentative research, because back in 1900, this guy, or earlier, Nicholas Notovich, who was a Russian explorer traveling around the Himalayas, broke his leg, was allowed to stay at Hemis for a couple of months. His Sherpa, the Nepalese guide who spoke Sanskrit or could read Sanskrit or Tibetan, was shown this text. They were shown it to Notovich, but he couldn't read it. So the translation, which everyone claims is made up, didn't come from Notovich. It came from this Sherpa. And then he published that in French and then later in English. But in the 1960s, a pandit, his name is difficult to pronounce, from India goes to Hemis and he sees the same text and he does his own translation, which matches pretty much word for word. In the book, I have a translation of the Conjure of Hemis, the story of Isa, of how they said he came and studied here. What's interesting about that document and kind of gives it credibility is that they talk about certain religious sects that no longer exist. So there was like the white priests of Persia was something that was people knew about, let's say back in the 800s and 900s, but they don't really know about now. So there's quite a few religious references, which I go into detail in the book, that anybody couldn't write. Notovich couldn't have written it, you see, because he would never have known about these different groups. But they tell the story of Isa and how he had blah, blah, blah. And what's most fascinating about it, and to me this has always been the reason I keep telling this story, it really is the heart of it, that the Sanhedrin did everything in their power to save Jesus. That they went to Pilate and they said, he is a man of the book. I don't care what he says. You cannot execute him because that's only in our purview. You are in charge of your Roman religion, but you can't execute a man of the book. And Pilate said, get out of here. Beat it. And then the Romans rewrote it when all the texts were brought to Rome, and then the Council of Nicaea, they decided what was being said. The new religion of Rome tried to make it look like somebody else ordered his execution than Pilate. It was Pilate who ordered the Romans to beat up. Nobody else but Romans touched Jesus. And this thing that's gone throughout history, as if somehow the Sanhedrin, the people who tried to save his life, were blamed for taking his life. And when they were rejected by Pilate, they went out into the public square, according to the Conjure of Hemis, eyewitnesses reports in a text, and washed their hands of his fate because they tried to save him. And now that's a ritual that only they could perform. And the head of the Roman religion, if he went out and performed that religion, they said, he washed his hands. I mean, literally would have been doing something sacrilegious against his own religion, which he was the head of in that area. So let's just be logical about it for half a second. Pilate brings Jesus. He had a spy in his camp. Wasn't Judas, but he had a spy in his camp, and people named him in the book. And then when he gets to Pilate grills Jesus, and Jesus doesn't say the answers he wants to hear. He didn't send him to Herod and then to have Herod send him back. Oh, I don't know what to do with him. That's not what he did. He just said, take him off, crucify him, to beat him, torture him, crucify him. He's not answering my questions the way I would like to. I mean, it makes infinite more sense. And what's fascinating in the accounts is more than one person describing that day when the Roman soldiers, 3, went out and spoke in public and read the charges against the prisoner who had been beaten, who had been flayed, who had been tortured, who was bleeding. And more than one eyewitness reports the same thing. They were standing in different parts of that square. And they talk about those charges and how they're read out. So, and then they talk about him not taking the whole cross. We've always seen that, the whole
that
cross.
imagery, yes.
According to the eyewitnesses, it's a beam. You take a beam up. Just the part that you're going to put your arms on. That's the part you take up because the pole is already there.
That's right.
So they pull the pole. It's pre-dug, and they pull the pole out, and then they strap the beam on. Then they said that he was tied. Everybody says the same thing. He was tied. There were ropes
instead of
the nails and all, because it doesn't make a lick of sense. You would fall off. Your body weight would pull you up.
Exactly. It makes no sense.
So except for his foot, apparently, and this is also a weird detail, they didn't hammer his foot because they were trying to be mean, because they had a process. They hammered his foot because it didn't fit, because he was too tall. And they had to find a way to get the 2 feet to fit on the bottom of this thing that was already pre-dug. And so
Yeah.
they took a nail and put that through his 2 feet.
Okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
so what can I say other than this is not Richard telling you the story of what happened to Jesus. This is what other people claim happened, word for word.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're punctuating that. That this is not you saying, I just thought
No.
with the time that I have in my life, I thought I would rewrite Christianity and the story of Christ and the crucifixion. So I want to get back to you, if it's okay, because this is where my curiosity is going, because I have listened to the book. And again, I encourage everyone to listen to it because it's even more compelling the way it's laid out in the book, chapter by chapter, to be able to follow along as you interview folks and hear these recurring same word messages from very diverse people. But you have said on the show that just ask him. Just ask him. We all have access. Some of us have the filters up and some of us don't have the filters up. And you are someone who, especially through your dreams, I'm understanding, but you are able to pull those filters away. How often are you in communication? Richard Martini.
With the man upstairs, that dude.
With that
Well,
dude, Jesus.
Well, put it this way. It's funny if you listen to Hacking the Afterlife or watch it on Martini Zone on YouTube. Frequently, Jennifer will say, I started off by saying, well, what are we going to talk about? I asked my friend Luana Andrews, who's on the flip side. She's a moderator. Who's on your guest list? And then she'll say, so-and-so is here. And I don't know that they're going to be there. I have no idea. I don't know who we're going to talk to. And then I try to remember, sometimes I'll say, can we talk to so-and-so? And I have said, can we talk to Jesus? Mm-hmm. Sometimes could he come in and answer some questions, especially when the book was about to come out.
But that's with Jennifer and Luna.
That's with Jennifer. That's right. And so,
right?
But Jennifer will say, Richard, you had a dream last night or 2 nights ago. And then I remember, yes, I did, but I didn't know who I was talking to. So, yes, it is true that I can remember talking to people on the flip side, happened the other night, where they're telling me something, and I wake up with the word or the phrase, or I'm trying to remember the phrase, and then I investigate it. I look into it later. But in terms of him, I would say, in my memory, there's probably been maybe 2 or 3 times, and I wish I could say it was more, but maybe 2 or 3 times where I woke up and had the feeling that I had a conversation with him. I will tell you something though. This was a dream that I had, and we'll call it a dream. I don't know what it was, honestly. I don't think I've mentioned it. Maybe I have. Stop me if I have. But I was in some other realm, and this was many years ago, way before this research.
Okay.
And I was walking along with, no other way to put it, like an army of dead. And it was like the old, kind of like the imaginary, whatever that would mean. People walking in one direction, not corpses or zombies, but just all covered in dust and gray. And they might have been soldiers, I don't know, but they were marching in one direction. And I became consciously aware that I was in this crowd, maybe 5, 10 on either side, marching somewhere in a direction. And I became consciously aware. I was like, wait a minute, where are we going? And I stopped, and I got, screwed up the march. And then I sort of went off to the side, and I went into what looked like a destroyed church. The roof was gone. Mm-hmm. And did I tell you this?
No, but I'm loving this.
So I'm in this kind of weird chapel, and around me are women and children and families and older and everything else. Like maybe this was a World War II, you see. That it might have been something felt like that. I don't know. Some cataclysmic event somewhere. Mm-hmm. And everybody was covered in gray and just sitting around in kind of this stupor of, just kind of like, I don't know where I am or what's happening. And I said, hey, wake up. What are you guys doing? And I stood up on a table and I said, don't you know that he's coming? And I was making it up. I wasn't talking about anybody particular, but I was just thought, these people need to be given some hope. And I just
Yeah.
started talking about hope, and I started talking about light. And the weirdest thing happened. The light, the heavens opened up, and there was this blast of light, and suddenly everybody went to color, and all the gray just fell away. And I thought, oh, this is funny. It's like I'm preaching, and
Right.
I was making it up, but I was talking about the one to come, like the person who's going to come. He's going to be here. It was like I thought that's what they needed to hear. All right,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
was that a Jesus come to Jesus moment? I don't know.
Well,
I
how
don't think so.
prescient. I hear it as prescient.
See? I
I
love
mean,
it.
it's so. Well, I mean, it's not exactly what. Sometimes we have these dreams where it's really hard to understand, and of course, hindsight being 2020. Now that you've done all this research and you've
Yeah.
published these books, and we're having this conversation right now, we can look back and it's like, oh my goodness, like that doesn't take, a psychoanalyst hours to try to understand. It's
Well,
pretty.
that's why I mention it, because it does seem to be related to what we're doing and talking about, which is,
Yes.
and so, but here's what I recommend to people, whether I can talk to them or not, it never has been about me, ever. Has always been about the fact that I just happen to be a nosy, annoying, questioner,
Curious,
curious filmmaker
dogged, tenacious.
who doesn't care about what people care about. I ask questions, and I just try to get them to ask questions. And then I've learned that when I would film these 6-hour hypnotherapy sessions, I mean, they would go so far and so deep. But then when people started asking me, well, what do you film? And then I would say, well, it goes like this. And within a few seconds, they were going far and deep. And so that became this thing of guided meditation. The book,
Yeah.
Divine Counsels in the Afterlife, is like 20 scientists talking about this same, and suddenly they're talking to aliens or talking to council members they've
Yes.
never seen before.
Yes.
So here's the most simple thing that I can give your listeners, which is picture yourself in a boat on a river. Very easy to do, but it allows you to be somewhere else. So what does the boat look like? Examine it. Is it wood? Is it metal? Do you know it? Is it familiar? Then look around, and we've done this, me and you, we've done this. And then we see the river. But instead of asking for your guide to come, did we ask Jesus to come?
We did not ask Jesus, but
Oh, well, so there you
to clarify this, because what I'm learning both from you as well as so many of my guests, to use your language, it's removing those filters by accessing the imagination. The
Yeah.
imagination is like that beautiful portal to release the filters because I was not in some sort of deep meditative state, and you just asked me to picture yourself in a boat on a river. It was not expected what just kept just like popping up. I didn't, some moments I was like, okay, I made that up. Some moments I'm like, I did not make that up. It just kept showing up. But that idea of the imagination being the space where we can open up that line of
portal.
communication, the
So
portal, the
my
garden
wife,
gate.
my wife mentioned this today, which is sometimes she'll go into a meditation and have this happen to her. And like everybody, she'll say, well, how do I know this is real? So she was talking to somebody, a friend of ours who had passed away. And in her mind's eye, she saw this person. She said, well, how do I know this is real? Can you show me a sign?
Yes.
Something that would be out of the ordinary, that would be very specific, so that I know that. And so this person said the name of an author. Just said, I'm a big fan of this author. And so sometime you're going to run into this author in a weird way. You won't be thinking about it until you see the name of the author. That was his suggestion. And about,
That's
6
what your
hours
wife
later.
heard.
Yeah. And she called me an hour ago. She said, you're not going to believe it. I was, and she told me, I didn't know this. And she said, and I'm looking up this thing, and there is the author's name. Like,
When she was looking up something different, so she wasn't
something
even thinking
completely
about the
different. She was
author.
looking up the life story of a friend, and then the friend was like, I'm a huge fan of this author. And so when she saw that name, she got that huge chill and the
Yes.
rush of recognition of saying, oh my God, this was so I'm not saying you need a medium. I'm saying you need to ask them.
Yeah.
Give me something that will make me realize that what we're doing is not made up. And sometimes you can ask them a question, and this is mind-bending, but you ask them a question, and they answer it before you even start the question. So you see in your mind's eye ice cream. And the question was, when was the last time we saw each other? And then you remember, oh, that's right, we had ice cream together.
Right.
You haven't even asked the question,
Yeah.
but you see the answer. And that's a way to realize they can anticipate. They're outside of time. They can anticipate what your question's
Yeah.
going to be. Remember, though, Jesus is not going to give you lottery numbers because, it would ruin your life. He's also not going to, he can't alter somebody's path who's already chosen their path. He won't do that. He can't do that.
Yep.
But he can help you with the most simple things of your journey, of trauma, because he'll say things. I mean, I've had this experience with many people and talking to him. He'll say things that are so beautiful and so simple, but so perfectly put, so that it's almost like he understands so much about you and your problems that he can put it in such a way as to completely calm the mind.
Yes, yes. So I want to talk, I keep getting this back to you because I'm always like, God, you already have the ability to lower your filter. I don't know, release your filter, whatever that verbiage is. I wonder why you don't do it more frequently. That's one question you can.
Well, you gotta
hold on.
Go ahead.
Okay. And then what you just said about Jesus is not going to, or are any of our guides, because we signed up for particular lessons, missions, blueprints, contracts, whatever you want to say. But we have a path. Richard, what is your path as you're becoming more and more aware?
Clearly, it's to talk to you, Kristin. Yes, my path has led to this door, and here I am knocking at it, opening it. Well, listen, I'm joking, but I'm not, which is, we mentioned this earlier. If you look at your life as a book or a novel and you think, what's my story? Yeah. You'll see that there's strings that happened back when you were a little kid. I teach at a local university, and what I ask my students, what was your first conscious thought you'd be doing what you're doing now? I ask it to everyone. I asked my surgeon. I had my hip replaced. And he said, I don't want to answer that. My assistant will. And she said, well, when I was like 5, I told my parents I want to be an orthopedic surgeon. And she said,
at
I didn't
5?
even at 5. She said, I didn't even know what the word meant. But she knew. And the reason she knew is because what people consistently report is that we exist prior to incarnation. We plan our journey with the help of guides and teachers and council members and classmates, but we plan it. And then we get here and we live it. We only bring a portion of our conscious energy. The rest of it's back home, but the portion here on stage isn't aware of it because of the filters. However, we get little taps on the shoulder every now and then.
That's right.
That's the girl you're supposed to talk to. That's the guy, because you're looking at that guy and he makes you feel like you're home. It's because you know him.
Yeah, he's part of
Love
your soul
at
family.
first sight is a perfect example because it's past tense. You already are in love by the time you first met them. So that there are many things in your life that are indicative of the fact that you planned it, and we just ignore it. We go, oh, that's coincidence. The song comes on the radio when you drive by your friend's house who passed away, and it's that song that associated with them. Now you think to yourself, well, logically, how did they program that song to show up at the exact moment I was driving by? I've asked the question, and they say, well, we're outside of time. It's not that hard to get 20 people to do the thing that we want you to do. Not that hard. We're not changing anybody's life, but we are making you aware that we still exist. So that's the second coming, if we want to call it that, I think, is becoming aware that Jesus never left.
That Jesus never left, and we never die.
And we never die because we never leave. And so the idea, we can access these holy people, men and women, and Mary Magdalene. We can access them and ask them about their journey. And they can give us advice because they've been giving people advice for at least a couple of thousand years. you can go, civilization's been around 70, 80,000 years. You can imagine there's been quite a few avatars that are on the flip side that people can still access and talk about and talk to.
Consult, yeah. Let me ask you this. This is a real, it's just talk about a non sequitur. I'm curious. There are those that I listen to and follow, and they say there are no accidents. Like, we have different exit portals when we are to die, and there is free will, but this stage that we come upon, we've made agreements as to how long we're going to be here, and so there's lots of stories I hear that really support that. And then I have one person who I have listened to for years, and he says, but sometimes there can be accidents. Like, you might have chosen in this lifetime, I'm going to live somewhere up into my 80s. But then you step outside and you're hit by a banana truck. And that was an accident, right?
Why
at
a
the age
banana
of 7.
truck?
I don't know, just came to me.
Because it's funny. because
it's funny. Because it's funny. Because I wanted to lighten it up, because this is really heavy conversation.
No,
so
I understand.
Are there just accidents like a damn banana truck running you over, even though your mission was to live into your senior years?
Well, so here's the thing, and this is how we can answer these questions, which is we can ask them. The people who got hit, the guy got hit by the truck. What happened? Was that an accident? We can ask them. And then we can talk to the truck driver, even the higher self of the truck driver, and say, what's up with that? Was that an accident? And that's what people don't think that we can do, because in that aspect of asking your guides, so you mentioned exit portals. I call them exit ramps, because I've heard it.
Okay.
I
heard
driving,
portals, you've heard ramps, yeah.
Well, and because ramps we all understand that, you're driving along the freeway of life, and there's an exit ramp I could take. I might, go out in front of that truck. But then you might evaluate, not the person on the planet, but the higher self.
Yes.
Have I accomplished everything I've tried to set out to do in this journey? Or have I got more stuff to do? And if you got more stuff to do, it's like, well, I'm not taking that ramp. And we've talked to people who've taken the ramp who said, you know what, I had an opportunity to check out earlier when I was younger. I was doing drugs and da-da-da-da, but I decided to stick around. So you're talking about free will, which we all have.
Yes.
And so now consider this thing of there's a lot of things to consider, but let's say we bring 20 to 40% of our conscious energy to a lifetime, roughly. And so that means 60% or to 80 is back home or doing something else. Could be incarnated in another planet, as people in Architecture of the Afterlife said. But anyway, they're back home. And so what are they doing? Playing tiddlywinks while I'm struggling down here? But, they're looking at us like a little, and not to make it a pejorative or a negative, but we're in a movie. We're in a 2-hour movie for them.
For them.
They consider, I've heard this many times, 25 years on Earth feels like 5 or 10 minutes to them.
Yeah.
So we're in a movie that, let's say it takes 80 years. It's a 2-hour movie, basically. And then when the movie's over, and this is the other weird thing to consider, you go to visit your counsel prior to incarnation, and they grill you. So what are you going to learn in this movie? And you go, well, I'm going to learn how to trust people a little bit more and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to try to forgive people what they did to me. And then you get here and not so much. And now you go back, and now there's your counsel meeting you again 2 hours later. And they go, so how'd you do? And you're like, I was great. I nailed it. And they go, hold on a second. Can we just look at this time where you just totally blew it?
And then the life review.
Your life review, and then you go over that. And then again, now you're back with your friends, and your friends are like, that was great. Let's do it again. What do you want to do next? Now, your friends may not all get back at the same time, let's just say. And let's say that another 2 hours later, or maybe 10 years, whatever, a year later, you all get together and say, let's do it again. And now they're asking you, would you play the role of my crazy Uncle Pete? And you say, no. I did that in the Viking era. I really don't like being the crazy Uncle Pete. I've done that. And they go, please, because you're so good at that. You're like the best actor we've ever had.
You've played the villain really well.
And you can consider doing that, you see. And now this is a mind-bending thing. I looked up the near-death experience that was in the book Plato's Republic. That's the kind of stuff I would look up in an afternoon. And so I was
I haven't
thinking to
read that
myself,
since high school.
if 2,500 years ago a near-death experience happened, wouldn't it make sense that it would be the same event today? You see? Like what they said to these people 2,500 years ago shouldn't change if it's real. And I was startled to see that is accurate.
Oh, good.
Because there's a certain amount, you'll see, there's a certain amount of Plato who's talking about the architecture of religion, who you're going to see when you die. So this guy died. He was a soldier. He was on a body pile for 10 days. And then they interviewed him and they said, what did you see? What happened? At some point he gets to his council, which he calls the three fates, which was in their religion and belief system, that your council were these muses who were like decided past, present, and future, just like in Christmas Carol, ghost of past, present, and future. So the three fates say the same things that people say today, which is you choose your lifetime, you choose the role you're going to play. You might choose to play a thief. You might choose to play the role of someone who gets hurt. And they said, stop judging others for the roles they play, that they choose to play, because you have no control over what they chose. You only have control over what you chose and how to react to them. You can't control how other people behave.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating look at what near-death experiences today talk about.
Yeah, and what stands out to me when I think about all the near-death experiences and the people like yourself who study near-death experiences and mystics and mediums is they say, I feel sorry for the people who did sign up to be the
Villain.
Nazi. Yeah, because they actually said, I'm going to step forward and have to live on the other side or live wherever we're talking about with the weight of the pain that I caused. I'm going to have to bear responsibility for that.
So, yeah. Well, I was going to say,
ahead.
I don't know if we've talked about this, but when I first started this research, I was at a Michael Newton Institute conference, and they said, yeah, why don't you film something? And so I filmed this woman, and she recalled dying in Auschwitz. And first she went back to her earlier life when she was happy, and then her family was all taken away from her, and then there she was, and she recalled the events of crossing over. And she gets to her council, and she says to them, this is the first person I filmed. She says, why did I choose such a difficult lifetime? She's asking her council. And then she says, they're showing me, this is going to be hard to explain, but they're showing me that it was harder to choose to play the role of a perpetrator than a victim in this life.
Right.
Because they're going to suffer more over many lifetimes for the harm that they caused.
Exactly.
And she said, from my perspective, and of course, look, I'm filming this, but she's saying, from my perspective, every day in the camp was like a PhD lesson in courage, in forgiveness, in compassion. I mean, I could never handle like that kind of a lesson, but she had chosen that. And then in the film Hacking the Afterlife, which is on Amazon now, finally.
Good. Congratulations.
Yeah, and talking to Bill Paxton and Hacking the Afterlife.
I'm going to go check
some
that
reason
out.
They misput it somewhere, and they finally put it on Amazon properly. Anyway,
so glad.
My friend Howard Schultz, who passed away a few years ago, he let me film him doing a past life session, and he remembered being in Dachau, and he talked about the choice of that life. He said, I had so many lives in the light and so many lives that were filled with joy and fun that I wanted to remember what it was like to experience the dark. So he put it, he said, but this was so dark that it scorched my soul. That's the way he put it. And then during the course of his session with Scott DeTamble, Scott said, well, is there any way we can help you recover? And he said, yeah, my guides are taking me to the River of Souls. And now I'm walking into this river, and I can feel all the pain being washed away from me. I mean, what an unusual thing to remember or to recall or to experience.
Right.
But anyway, I'm just saying there were two people who said they chose those lifetimes, even though they had a lot of trauma, but the lessons were much stronger. I heard it a long time ago. It's in Flipside. You can learn more from one day of tragedy, more spiritually, from one day of tragedy on Earth, than you can in 500 years on some other planet. Because
Holy cow.
over 35% of the reports from the Newton Institute include memories of lifetimes on other planets. And
Yeah.
so they were pointing out, like, there's a lot of boring planets out there where nothing happens. And, you know,
I
you're
know some of us are like, God, on a bad day, I would really love to go one of those planets and just sort of chill.
right, right. But
Yeah.
then you
But
got to
there's so much more
remember,
spiritual evolution.
also you had the courage
The courage to come
to
here.
come here, courage
Yeah.
to join your friends, the courage to be here to help somebody or heal somebody or take care of somebody. And if you just allow for a minute that maybe it's possible that I chose to be here, then look around and see, well, then who is it for? What am I here to learn?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to, as we're transitioning, because time goes by really quickly. So it's, yes, what am I here to learn? And then if anyone can get their hands on any of the books about Life Between Lives and the Newton Institute, what was so fascinating to me was they're not just going up there floating on clouds or looking after us. They're up there, different aspects of their soul, going through different processes, learning different things, having different experiences. Like, there's so much that is happening up there, over there.
So
I don't know
I'll
the
give you
right
one example.
terminology.
And this happened in our podcast. And so Jennifer and I were, I'm asking Luana who's here. And she said, this movie producer's here. And I guessed who it was. Carl Laemmle, who was the guy who founded Universal Pictures, who passed in 1939. It was weird that I guessed it, but they put it in my head. I said
That's
it.
exactly.
Carl Laemmle?
I love that you clarified. You didn't guess it. They put it in your head.
Yeah, because I said, is it Carl Laemmle? And they were like, yeah, it is. Jennifer was like, who's that? I said, it's okay. I know who he is. And so I said, now describe it to me. What's it like for you? You left in 1939. He said, I came here to tell you today that you can fly, you can go to different realms, you can take any class that you can imagine, that you can create sporting events, you can participate in those sporting events, you can be part of an audience, you can create edifices, you can create buildings, you can fly into other realms.
If you can imagine it, you can experience it.
You can experience it. He said, I'm right now learning how to cook Indian food. And then he said, using different kind of salt. And then he said, in fact, when you get bored with doing all the great adventures over here, that's when you decide to come back.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's one funny way to put it. But listen, you can't make pizza over there the same. Can't make cappuccinos over there. Can't hold a baby's hand the same. Can't, feel the sea wind in your face when you're driving along the beach. It's very hard to create. Let's just put it that way. You could if you had a memory of it. But in general, I'm just thinking about Bill Paxton because Bill has come through an old friend of mine many times, and recently he came through. Rob Lowe did a session with a medium live on his show, and Bill came through his show, which is funny because, I've talked to him many times. I made a film; it's on Amazon, talking to Bill Paxton. But ultimately, he was talking about surfing, and he's saying that he didn't surf in life, but he's now. And he's created everything, the ocean, the water, the tree, the boop. You can create all that stuff and do all of these really wonderful things, including hear your loved ones back on stage asking for your help. And you can show up and say, yeah, well, I can help you as much as I can, maybe have a few laughs with you.
Yeah.
But I can't
if we're paying attention. And if we're paying attention. And so that's why I'm always focusing on, both for myself and anyone who is ever listening, to create a life where we more intentionally pay attention, because the signs are there, the relationships exist, right? So we need to wrap up. I have so many more questions. When we started, I'm like, what am I going to ask Richard? And then as we get going, I'm like, oh, I want to ask him this. I'm like taking notes, and I will bring it next time. And I want to continue with you for as long, once a month, as you're open to it, because we got a big
I'm totally
book.
open. I can't believe we've had how many? We've had more than 4, haven't we? This is
We've had
4
like
for this book.
6. I think we've had 6 or
Doesn't it feel like we started talking about a minute ago?
Yes.
And it always feels that way when I talk to you. So who knows? Maybe we're outside of time right now. Maybe we're talking on the
Time is just a concept, man. You're teaching me that. So once again, thank you so much for everything that you're teaching. Tell everyone, you talked about Amazon, your documentary.
Oh, yeah, Amazon. I just discovered the other day that they hadn't been, my films weren't on Amazon. They should have been. Talking to Bill Paxton, Hacking the Afterlife, and Flipside. Those three, if you just want to get a taste of, it's not hard to just sense it out. Then I've got 11 books, including the Jesus book. And the first 10, all of them four of them are with Jennifer Schaefer. So the Backstage Pass to the Flipside and Tuning into the Afterlife are all about musicians who've shown up to talk to us. And if you listen to the podcast, we had like Tony Bennett and Jimmy Buffett.
And Jenny Bennett. And I loved you saying, hey, can I get the pass? And how do I get a pass?
Yeah,
to the
true
backstage?
story. Jimmy Buffett came and mocked me about the fact that I had asked him for his pass. I think that was pretty funny. And it happened.
That's hilarious.
Anyway.
Yeah, and he brought it back up. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate
Thank you, Kristin.
Thank
you. You are a delight. And we'll catch you in a month.
All righty, I can't wait.
All right, very good. Thank you.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.